Welcome to the Mental Insights podcast with your host, Brennan Catuli. We are here today for episode number 40 with Nelson Lee. Nelson, thank you for taking this time out with me to speak about such an important topic within mental health and just, how to be the best version of yourself. So, thank you for being here on the Mental Insights podcast, Nelson.
Absolutely. Glad to be here. Thanks so much for having me.
My pleasure. And, I'm really excited to dive deep because, initially when we spoke, we had a lot of similarities just in terms of, our upbringing, what we faced. And really the first question that I love to ask my guests is, when did you really first understand and learn the importance of mental health and just why it's important within your own life today?
Definitely. That's an awesome question. Because I think for so long, I didn't really realize that we all have mental health. And it actually took me getting to, I guess, a really poor place with my mental health to recognize how important it was. And so it happened when I was about 19. And I remember the thing that triggered it was just having a random panic attack. And I remember not knowing really what caused it, where it was coming from. But looking back, I could see there were a lot of behaviors over years and years and years that actually culminated in that event. And at the time, I just thought it was a weird thing. And then I noticed that my anxiety was through the roof after that. At the time, I don't know if I would even call it anxiety. It was just discomfort. I didn't like it. And I didn't really know what was going on. I had no education about it. But yeah, it took really getting into that place where all of a sudden I was like, crap, I have something to deal with here before I recognized how important it is to address mental health. And it took a long time to really get to the point where I understood what I could do as well.
Thank you for sharing that, Nelson. And you really brought up some great points. One being, the lack of education. And that was something for myself. And I think for many people as well, is just, not being aware of maybe some of these emotions or some of these tendencies are as well. You brought up the, behavioral aspects that you can, become aware of and start to see after you become aware and see kind of some of the things that were spiraling into, some of these issues. And I can definitely relate to that. And, for yourself, what kind of techniques did you use to become aware of, some of the behaviors, some of the emotions that you experienced throughout, your own past and throughout this journey of, becoming the best version of your mental health and improving yourself daily?
Yeah, so for me, it took a long time to get to the place where I actually understood what the tools were. But over the years, I found that really some of the best things that I've learned along the way are principles of acceptance. And with that comes mindfulness and really just being able to observe myself, observe, the thoughts that are taking place, the feelings that are coming in, and recognizing my responses to those. Because I think so often our responses to our feelings, our emotions, our thoughts, they just become automatic. And being able to see that and break down that automatic response and start making choices, that was probably the overarching tool or skill that once I developed that, it's what really started to set me free. And like I said, it did take a long time to get to that. I saw several therapists who, they gave me tools here and there, and some of them were beneficial, some of them weren't. But overall, I would say that acceptance compiled with mindfulness and just general awareness, that's really what did it for me.
That's awesome to hear. And, those are definitely very similar techniques that, definitely are out there for many people. And certainly, as you say, some are good, some are bad. And, you found what was truly going to help you to, identify and manage your own emotions. And, through the tools of mindfulness, what are some specific ones that you like to use? And, how often do you use them for, my audience? How often do you use them and what time periods do you use it? Is it times when you're only feeling distressed, or is it at times when, you just need kind of that breath of fresh air?
hmm That's a really good question because I think a lot of times, and even me in the beginning, I felt the need to only address things when they were hard. And it was really easy to be like, okay, I'm feeling anxious. I need to go do something to take care of that. I need to do breathing exercises, whatever it may be. But I found that when I did it that way, when I took the approach of only addressing it when it's a problem, it became just another compulsive behavior that I was using to control the anxiety. And so what really helped was approaching it as a lifestyle change. And so when we're talking about specific skills and kind of the details within there, especially when it comes to mindfulness, I found that daily practice was critical. And really what that looks like is usually sitting and just doing meditation for anywhere from 15 to 30 minutes a day. And all I'm doing while I'm meditating is just observing my thoughts and bringing my focus back to my breath. And it's just this consistent process of doing that, watching myself get distracted, watching thoughts come in, watching feelings come in. And all I'm doing is bringing myself back to the present. And really the act of meditation is, it's almost like if you're training for a marathon or something else, it's almost like the speed drills for that. It's like you're building this skill as a daily practice. And when you do it daily, you kind of get a culmination of positive impact that builds up over time. And that was something that was really beneficial. And it's also something that I noticed, it's not something that you want to do just to get rid of those feelings like we talked about before. And to kind of piggyback on that thought, it's something that you want to carry with you throughout the day. It's not something you just want to sit down and do for that 15 to 30 minutes. The reason you're doing it is so that you can run the marathon, so that you can pull that skill into your daily life. And so if you're only doing it just as like, okay, I'm going to do this because it's my checklist item for the day, and then I'm off to the races and my mind's going to be all busy and distracted and whatever else for the rest of the day, that's not super beneficial. So it's like really practicing with an attitude of application and bringing it into those daily moments. And then when it kind of fits into the whole of your life, that's when it starts making that beneficial impact that kind of really helped me get over the hump.
It's really such a valuable tip, Nelson. I appreciate you stating that, because I think there's a big dividing line between when you're actually in practice and you're actually becoming truly aware after, implementing many of these techniques, rather than, either not doing any of the techniques at all, or not even being fully aware of its, intentions. And like you're saying, just doing it for 5-15 minutes, and then the rest of your day is still carried out through bad behavioral or coping mechanisms throughout the day. I think to touch more upon that, how have you seen your mindset and your perspective change as you've been able to be fully encompassed within the practices of mindfulness, or, seeking out the awareness throughout your own life and becoming to identify and manage your emotions? What truly has changed? Has it visually? Has it, just intentionally throughout your relationships? How has there been a change within your own perspective and mindset throughout this process of being fully, completely, indulged upon these techniques?
Yeah, I think with that, it's such a slow process that it's almost hard to see the growth when you're in the middle of it. But looking back, I can see that there are some really big differences in the way that I think, in the way that I just conceptualize myself, even from the beginning of the journey to where I am now. And with that being said, like I want to articulate as well that I'm still on the journey, right? We all are. So it's like you're never done. But I would say that looking back, it's something where, you just take step after step, and slowly you kind of build up that skill, and you end up in a different place eventually. And so it just takes time. But I think some of the biggest differences in my life are the way that I handle thoughts, the way that I handle those feelings. And it used to be that, I believed those feelings and those tough thoughts that were coming in and that I was experiencing, those needed to be basically extinguished. I needed to get rid of them. And so my entire relationship with those has changed. And it's changed with all the thoughts, all the feelings that I have. And so really it's created space for those. So, or I should say that I've created space for those. I now allow those feelings to be with me. I allow those thoughts, even if they're uncomfortable, I allow them to just be there. And it's okay for them to be there. You can still do the things that you want to do with them. And that was one of the biggest changes. So I would say the kind of beliefs and the underarching judgments that I had about my own thoughts and my own experiences, that was one of the biggest changes. And it was really interesting the more I became aware of my own situation, how, I guess, extensive those old beliefs were. I mean, they were everywhere. And it's like all of a sudden, once I recognized it, I could see them in all these different places and in a lot of different places in my life where they weren't bothering me, but they were still contributing to the overall underarching pattern. And so being able to tap into that pattern and see where I can kind of intervene, I can get aware about a situation and then work to change it. That's what was super beneficial. And that's where the biggest change came in for me.
That's so awesome to hear, Nelson. And it's truly, one of the most beneficial things about, seeking out a therapist or working throughout some of these techniques, such as mindfulness, meditation, or, many other people have many different forms of, how to meditate, whether it's walking, yoga, any type of exercise or such. But, I think we spoke really a little bit about how there can be some misinformation as you're going throughout a session with a therapist. And I think this is important. You spoke that there was some good and there was some bad, but can you speak about how some misinformation by a therapist can lead you into another direction, and what you need to be aware of as you work throughout your own personal journey, to give a little glimpse for my audience, maybe if they're seeking out a therapist now or in sessions currently.
Definitely. And it's tricky because, every therapist is going to be different. Everyone is going to interact with you in a little bit of a different way. But as far as finding someone who's really good, you want to find someone who is going to challenge you to live the life that you really want, not someone who's going to limit you. And I felt like that was one of the bigger setbacks that I experienced, was interacting with therapists who basically, like, they slapped a label on me. They're like, you've got OCD, you've got generalized anxiety disorder. It's going to impact your life this way. And you should basically work your whole being around that. And I found that, initially that's what I did and that's what I expected. I didn't know any better. And so I just went with it, and I was like, all right, I guess I'm gonna have to go slower. I'm gonna have to, take it easy more, and just not challenge myself as much. But slowly I ended up just kind of pushing those boundaries just little by little and discovering, okay, you know what, I am actually a little bit more capable than this. And this doesn't have to be as limiting as, maybe I previously thought. And so I think it's interesting because you want to strike a balance between it. Because, I mean, there obviously are some things that are going to limit you, but I think it's okay to play with those boundaries. Figure out where they are for yourself. You don't have to take someone else's word for where they are. You can kind of discover it. And then once you do discover it, you can respect that boundary for yourself, but maybe you can come revisit it again later. So that's one of the biggest things that I realized, is don't let yourself just get boxed into something that someone else gives you, right? Like a label, or if they tell you, your life is going to be this way or that way. I think the biggest thing to look for with a therapist is someone who's really going to help you get to where you want to be, and isn't going to put you in that box and say, this is a management thing, right?
It's such a valuable, insight within how there's mischaracterizations within, this field, specifically a lot of the labels that are being in place, and, how that is bringing a lot of people's perspectives of themselves and of others. It really brings down upon many people, which I completely agree that we need to try to move into a different way of, labeling others, and, offering this time for people to understand that it doesn't really define them. It's not going to change really who they can be perceived to be. It's not going to stop or limit your growth throughout your own life. Like you're saying, you can follow your dreams, you can follow your passions, and live the life that you want, no matter what you may be faced or challenged with mentally. And that's something that people need to definitely communicate better, especially in terms of therapists speaking within their clients. And there's been this large shift within bringing out coaches within a field to offer services that's not you know, a specific therapist or psychologist. Can you speak about building brainwaves and speak about, what you're offering to people and what you're doing online to advocate for mental health?
Absolutely. And really, the biggest goal with it is to create conversations around it and just create an open place to discuss some of the things that have helped me, as well as just the things that I've learned and what other people have learned. And I think, just making that open space for people to communicate about it and to share their stories, to ask questions. It just creates a good environment around mental health where we can all kind of learn together. And so that's, I think, the first goal of it is just to help educate and create that conversation. And so that's really what I've been working on most with it. And then on the side, I do individual coaching where I offer individual sessions. And with that, it's kind of just like training for your mind, where all right, we figure out what are the patterns that are going on, and how can we basically get you to a place where you're acting on your values instead of your feelings or your thoughts. You don't want to put your feelings and thoughts in charge of your life is really like the bottom line there. But that's kind of just it in a nutshell, what I've been working on and what building brainwaves is all about.
That's awesome. And we'll make sure to have, the link towards building brainwaves within the show notes so everyone can check it out and get more accustomed with the work that you're doing now. Within your work, you're speaking about, finding these patterns and as well that can link up with, some habits that you pick up, whether it's from a therapist, whether it's through some of these techniques that you spoke about. What are some habits that you've implemented within your life besides meditation that has been, foundational or a big structure within how you go about your day?
So for me specifically, dealing with anxiety and OCD, really what's been super beneficial is taking more of a proactive approach to life. And so the more I can implement habits into my life that help me do that, the better. And it's really nice because whenever you get into, I guess, times or stages where you're feeling really compulsive, you're not engaging in the actions that you want to be engaging in, you're just kind of going down that rat hole of anxiety, you can usually trace back your patterns of behavior to something, or maybe even just like a key event that kind of sent you down that hole, right? And what you can start doing is figuring out ways to either embrace and accept whatever that is and work on it, mentally, or if it's a cue that's physical. Like for example, one of the easiest or the most basic habits that I implemented is not sleeping in the same room as my phone. I noticed that when I wake up and my phone's right next to my bed, I can pick it up and I start scrolling. And that just starts my day off in more of an impulsive and more just reactive way. And it sets me up to think that way for the rest of the day. And it's almost like if that happens, I have to pull myself out of it. And so little habits to set yourself up for success are going to be like that. It's like a simple thing I can do is just pop my phone outside of my bedroom and just leave it there for the night. I just use an alarm clock instead. And so the more you can do little things like that, I'm trying to think of more examples. I mean, I use sticky notes. I write stuff on my mirror just as like little reminders. I use just like little expo markers or whatever, and just put little cues there. So it's like I'm remembering, I'm keeping my goals and whatever it is that I'm trying to get through or to work on. I'm making those visible, and I'm putting them in a place where I'm going to see them. They're going to get in my way, and they're going to help me make the decision that I want to make. So I think the more you can kind of create the environment around yourself to support the decisions that you want to make, the better off you're going to be, and those decisions are going to be easier.
That's so great to hear, Nelson. I really like both of those examples and, those ways that people can practice implementing other habits. And, there's really so many ways that you can implement a habit such as, yours as putting your phone outside. Like there's so many different small inconsistencies that we don't notice that we can change within our daily habits that, truly becoming aware of it is that step in order to, manage what you can change. These are all things that a lot of people, especially like what you're talking about earlier, it's stuff that you can't even really notice because it's just kind of second nature. It just immediately happens throughout your life. And it's not something that you could really, wrap around and change immediately. When, we speak about these habits that are going into place, did you notice any, not say negative ones, but did you notice any ones that were very, immediate towards feeding into your types of, anxiety or different aspects of a depressive episode? Were there habits that were kind of, you know, fueling per se some of the challenges that you faced within, your own mental health? Because I think they could offer some insight to people who are listening that might not identify or become aware of these yet.
Definitely. And there are a ton. And like you said, there are a lot of just really small things. I mean, just to reiterate the one I just mentioned, the way I use my phone has a really big impact on my own mental health. The more impulsive I am on my phone, the more impulsive I am in everyday life and all my other interactions. And so I would say that was a big one. And then a lot of the other habits that I guess you could say were poor or leading me to a place that I didn't want to go were really mental habits. They weren't things that you could visually see outside of myself. So if someone was observing me, they wouldn't be able to tell. But one of the biggest things was rumination. So it's like I would get caught up on something. I mean, an example of this that I give semi-frequently is basically if you have a social interaction or something with someone that you want to make a good impression on, and then later maybe the thought pops up into your head, maybe I said something dumb, maybe I offended them. Something happened in that interaction to make it go south. And then all of a sudden you start winding up and you're replaying that conversation in your head. You're trying to figure out what happened. That's something that can happen really quickly and really easily that can slowly cycle out of control. So the more I allow myself to ruminate on things that have happened in the past, and the more I try to almost control those things mentally and get more certainty around them, that really takes me into a negative direction. And I've found that that same scenario that applies to a ton of different things. It's just uncertainty in general. If I've experienced anything in the past and I'm like, oh, I feel like I really need to get like certain about this. I need to figure out, the gist of whatever it is, whether it's, maybe it's a relationship, maybe it's, I don't know, like I said, if you offended someone, if you are going to get into a specific school or something like that, you're just like worrying about it and you're internalizing all of that and you're letting your brain wind up on it. That was one of the biggest things that I noticed that really took me down the wrong path, and it just kind of feeds on itself, and engaging in that really created more uncertainty. It never actually created more certainty for me. I never felt better about the situation after I thought about it for 30 minutes, an hour, 4 hours, however long, right? And so what really helped was getting out of my head, basically recognizing when that was going to happen, or when that was happening, when I was getting sucked into it, and then pulling myself out of those thoughts while just recognizing them and deciding what I want to do. What do I value in that given moment? And really, there's almost always going to be something that you value more than worrying about something, right? There's something you can put your energy into that is going to give you something better to look for. It's going to improve your life. And that was a huge thing for me, was realizing that I could let go of those. I could let go of the rumination. I could let go of the worries. And really the first step to that was just being aware of it and getting insight into how it was occurring and then being able to intervene. But yeah.
Awesome. Yeah, it's really all about breaking those patterns. And, obviously the first step, becoming aware, is definitely a challenge in and of itself. But, once you become aware, it's really all about that action and identifying it and really taking action upon that. We speak about a lot of things that are spoken about kind of as a norm throughout mental health, and especially some of these habits and certain lifestyle changes that people can make to make improvements within their life. But there are a lot that people may not know, or they may have a misconception about, and share information that might not necessarily lead to the right discussion or trigger or one that doesn't necessarily help the situation within your own experiences, in your youth. What have you really heard throughout the conversation about mental health, and what are some misconceptions that you see today that people are chatting about and that isn't necessarily the right way to go about having the conversation revolving around mental health?
Hmm. I think there are a few things, and things that I still hear on occasion. One of them that I think I struggled with, and I struggled to get over and really change my belief system around, was hearing that you can control the thoughts that pop into your head or the feelings that you're experiencing, and that you should be able to 100% control that. If you like basically you shouldn't feel down about something, just because it's a negative emotion, and being able to control that is something you should be able to do. And I haven't found that that's really a truth. And I think that, things are going to be tough regardless of where you're at in life, and having negative emotions is a natural part of life if you are a human. And so being able to accept that and make choices in regard to those feelings is where the real power is. So you don't have to control it, but you can still make a choice on where you want to go. And so it's a weird paradox, because it seems like the more that you really indulge into a feeling, it's like if you're feeling down and it's like you indulge in that and you let that control your behavior, the worse it's going to get. But if you're able to embrace it and accept it and make a conscious decision about what you want to do, you're able to circumvent that and you're able to change that up. And the same thing goes with thoughts, especially with OCD. A lot of it revolves around getting intrusive thoughts that they just pop into your head. And so thinking that you can control those and you can force them out of your head is not helpful. And it actually makes them worse. It's like you're fighting something so bad or so hard that it becomes your focus. And it's like you just start getting them more and more frequently. And so I found that you can't necessarily control the things that pop into your head, but what you can control is what you do with it. You can control the thinking that occurs after it. So it's almost like there's a difference here between thoughts that are popping in and the thinking that occurs after it as a reaction. And so being able to kind of separate those two was really beneficial for me. And being able to, like I said, use agency, use my power to make a choice around whatever that experience is. And that's what really can set you free. And so I think, the negative side of that is, if someone tells you, you shouldn't feel this way, you should be able to control whatever that feeling is, and basically extinguish it. Or if someone says, thought stop, like just push the thoughts out of your mind, depending on, what type of brain you have, especially if you're susceptible to anxiety or OCD, that could be a really damaging thing for you, because now you have this expectation that I shouldn't have these and I should be able to control it, when you really can't. And it's going to exacerbate it. And so I guess the weird paradox around it is that the more you embrace those things and accept them and make room for them, that's when they start slowing down and going away. And it's just a really strange thing.
It truly is, but I appreciate you sharing those, because they definitely offer, some good insights to, those listening about some, perspectives that might not necessarily, be the true conversation that they need to hear. And, you're bringing up some valuable points that need to be heard, because I think often, those are things that I think people deal with a lot within conversation. And it's something that is really truly talked about that many people are not aware enough of, throughout this lack of education that's going on throughout our society today. As well, just the conversation about it is still in a demeaning and negative way. There's still the labels, there's still the stigma. And by these conversations, by the work that you're doing with building brainwaves, we're trying to slightly change the conversation. But to ask you, what is your hope for the conversation of mental health to be within, the next few years? And, what do you initially want to change within this, with this field, in order to make those steps forward?
I think the biggest change is I'm looking for, I guess, a conversation of openness, and to kind of take the shame aspect out of it. And that area of stigma, like you said, it's still there for a lot of people. And there's shame with saying I've gone to a therapist. There's shame with saying, I struggle with, emotions or mental illness or whatever you want to call it, with labels. And I think that first, just being able to get rid of that feeling of shame and recognizing that it's really not very different than going to the doctor. It's not different than taking care of your physical health. I think that's really the goal here, and it's just making it another subject that we can all improve on, and it's something that we all experience. That no one is exempt from it, and so it's just something that I think the more open it becomes, the more we're able to share and talk about the things that have helped, and share the things that there's evidence behind that are actually making differences in people's lives. That's really where, I guess, for me, I want the direction to go. It's just sharing that valuable information and just continuing to learn. And that's the thing, we're kind of in an interesting place with it, where things are starting to kind of tip over towards that way, where things are becoming more open, and there is less shame. And so it's like, the more we can cultivate that and just push that over the edge, the better off we'll all be.
I completely agree. And I think the aspect of, allowing the resources to be available to everyone is certainly such a big proponent of it. For many people, that stigma and that, lack of education causes many people to not reach out and to seek out that support. You spoke a little bit about of how it should change the conversation to allow people to think that seeking out a therapist is similar to going to a doctor. Completely agree. And for your own experience, was there a defining moment that really made you say, all right, I need to make the next step within my mental health? Or, was it a culmination of you understanding your own experiences, your own thoughts? What was kind of the driving factor for you to step up and take command? Because for many of my audience members who may not have reached out yet, what else could they hear in order to leapfrog them to make the next step as well?
I think with that, it's almost a hard truth, but I think the only one or the only person who has the ability to make an impact on your mental health and to really take yourself where you want to go is you. And even if you are seeing a therapist, the therapist can't fix you. Your parents can't fix you. Your friends can't fix you. Like, really, that choice has to come from yourself. And if you realize that there are things that are occurring in your life that you want to change, it's okay to get help with that. But don't put the reins completely in that person's hand, right? You still are in control of what you do with the information that you receive. You're in control of educating yourself more so that you can make informed decisions when you're working with a therapist. And so I think the biggest thing here is just to take responsibility for it. And I know it's definitely a tough thing. It's not easy to realize that you're in a hole and you need to get yourself out, and that no one is really going to come and save you from that. But taking that initiative, finding a way to get resources, finding a way to get the help that you need is the first step. And I know for a lot of people that can be really tricky, whether it's financial burdens or other things. And for that, I would just say, use the resources that are available to you. There are a lot of websites out there around mental health that are sharing information. Use those, use what you can, and educate yourself first, and then see what else is out there. I know there are a lot of therapists and facilities that have programs for people who maybe aren't financially able to get therapy. And so look for the resources, do some work there. And that's what's tricky, is it takes work. And so I think the more you're willing to take responsibility for yourself in that way, and just own that situation, the better off you'll be.
It's so true, Nelson. And I appreciate you bringing that up. It's definitely it's the hardest step, but it's the most impactful. I think once they take that leap of faith and say, all right, I need the support, I need the resources, then they can really start to work on themselves and dive deep into who they truly want to be. Oftentimes, we're speaking about breaking these patterns, and much of these is due to, different emotional responses and coping mechanisms that may have been caused due to an early experience. Sometimes this early experience is a trauma, sometimes it's an emotional abuse, sometimes it can be a mix of things throughout one's life, but it causes them to really you know be driven into many of these different emotional responses and such. Throughout this, how has that really allowed one, I think, to heal and break those patterns when such a impactful event can happen within one's life? And how easy is it to intercept on some of those patterns when it's really driven home through a powerful experience, such as like a trauma or an emotional abuse?
Yeah, that's a really good question, and it's a tough one at that because everyone has different experiences with trauma, and it has different impacts on people. But I would say, really, the way that you interact with your trauma is still present, even though the event occurred in the past. The way that you're dealing with that now is what's really impacting you, and it can be really easy. And I noticed this in myself when after I was in a really dark place with my mental health. I remember being almost afraid to like mess with that and to even think about those times. It was like, man, if I think about it too much, I'm going to go back into it. It's like that was traumatic for me. I experienced a lot of pain and I don't want to go back there. But for me, what helped so much was accepting that fear around it. And then also just accepting the event in itself. And you don't have to accept the event in a way that's like the event was good. The event was like, beneficial or anything, but it's okay to realize that, what, maybe it was really hard. Maybe it was, harder than you could even imagine. And that's okay. It's okay that it was that hard. And you can really embrace the fact that, that happened to you. The feelings with it are really tough and you can embrace that aspect of it. You don't have to um, support whatever it was, but you can still embrace those feelings, those tough emotions around it, instead of avoiding them, instead of trying to push them away. And the more you let those feelings just kind of run their course, which they're going to do, they're going to pop back in, especially if you're avoiding them. They're going to keep hounding you and hounding you and hounding you, and maybe for years. But the more that you can really embrace those and get yourself to a place where you can embrace that, what, that's something that happened. That is something that, whether I like it or not, it happened in my life and I'm moving forward. I'm now taking actions in the direction that I want to go while I accept those things. That's, for me, that's really the key.
That piece of acceptance truly is, and it's reframing the context of the experience is what truly can change the matter of events, your own just, I think, belief system, your own memory of this experience can change depending on how you reframe it through different techniques as your approach just of your visual response of that. There's definitely many ways, but oftentimes it is a deep experience that causes many challenges throughout people's lives, especially creating some of these behavioral patterns that changes the course of many people's lives, and they can't really
Yeah.
tap into it within 5-10 years. And it's definitely it's challenging to heal for many throughout this period, but I think that period of acceptance is very valuable to take that first step in how they can heal.
Hmm.
Also spoke about the relationships. I think this also goes into consideration within some people's trauma at their youth, because oftentimes it does deal with some of their upbringing, whether it's in their own community or within their own home environment. And this place of relationships, I think, is such a key valuable topic to speak about, just in terms of how fundamental is. You spoke a little bit about your environment, but within your relationships, within your environment, and how they can play a big course within your own mental health and taking those steps to move forward.
As far as relationships go, I think they're a critical part of mental health. And, I think that when it comes to dealing with others, you can kind of you can help support yourself by building positive relationships. And, especially if you are struggling, communicating that to the people around you is going to put them in a position to help you. And I think, the more that you learn about yourself and whatever it is that you're dealing with, you can communicate that to the other people around you in a way that helps them support you. Because I know, especially with something like obsessive compulsive disorder, usually if you're talking to loved ones or those that you're close with about what you're dealing with, their first reaction is they want to reassure you. They want to tell you it's going to be okay. They want to, basically try to extinguish whatever it is that you're obsessing about. And so if you can communicate to them that, what, right now, what I don't need is reassurance, and that, reassurance is actually going to take me down a path that I don't want to go. So I don't want you to give it to me in the future. Even if I come to you and I'm like, I'm really worried about this thing or this or this or this, like, tell me it's going to be fine. And if you can communicate that to whoever it is that, you're speaking with, and you can give them the information that's going to help them help you, then that's, a win-win. And you're building that relationship while you're supporting your mental health. And so I think just being open about it and being willing to communicate with others about it is what's going to help you, and it's going to help them get more understanding about it. And I think that's going to contribute to the whole community aspect of it that we talked about before. And so, really just being open and being willing to be vulnerable about it, and still reaching out. I think one thing that does happen when you are struggling with mental illness, is it's easy to kind of become if I can speak, reclusive, and really shut down and stop being socially active. And I think that the more you recognize that, the social part of your life is something that you need. That's something that I think all of us value, and we all really want to pursue that deep down. And so making that a priority and saying, even if I'm feeling like garbage on a Thursday or a Friday night, I'm still going to go out. I'm going to see friends. I'm going to see family. I'm going to do what I can to reach out to people. And it can be small things too. They don't have to always be people that It can be people at the grocery store. It can be people in your everyday life that you can reach out to. And I think that's one of the hardest things to really get in touch with, is remembering that sense of human connection when we're just going through our everyday lives. We're so busy. We're just moving from thing to thing, but keeping that sense of human connection present and keeping it as a priority is something at least that I've found to be really beneficial. And it's hard. I think
It
it's really
is.
tough, but the more you can do it, the better off you'll be.
I completely agree. It's definitely such a impactful yet I think challenging, you know, concept for many people, because the idea of sustaining many positive relationships can be challenging, and a lot of times people take those over versus taking care of themselves, and there's many different, issues that can come up within, whether it's an abusive relationship or even to yourself. I think there's many different aspects that you can reflect upon your relationships and see which truly are beneficial and what ones you need to work within.
Hmm. Yeah, and I think that's a huge point. Like, recognizing which relationships are having a negative impact on you. That's just as important as building those positive relationships. And, sometimes that might mean, cutting someone out entirely, or just lessening, the amount of time you're spending with someone. If, that's something that is bringing you down, it's clear that the person doesn't value you. Um, that's something that it's tough, but it's definitely a necessary component of taking care of yourself.
It certainly is, because oftentimes people can drag us down. They can bring us into some of those places that, we are having these mental challenges. So it's really, something that you need to be very cognizant of, and have these, self-reflective questions, and, evaluate who is beneficial and who's not within your own life. And, to really bring a full circle throughout this episode, I love to ask my guests this as a last question, to leave my audience in kind of a good perspective of what you've experienced, but maybe what you're moving forward into. I like to offer the, concept that you have, maybe you are, but are writing your own book throughout some of the life experiences that you've had. And what I want you to do is to, speak about one chapter that maybe was a profound experience or was, very impactful lesson, or it could just be some person, something that really drove a profound change within your life. But give us a glimpse into, why that is so meaningful for you at this time, and how that has changed the course of yourself, and why that would be a one chapter within your life story.
Awesome. That's a solid question. I would say that probably the most impactful chapter of my life has been making the shift from a fear-based mindset to a value-based mindset. And it's not something that just happens overnight. It's something that takes day in and day out practice, and really being able to engage myself in the process of recognizing when I'm acting, out of fear, which previous to learning everything that I have about mental health, that was almost all the time. So many of my decisions were just based on fear. It was based on my feelings. It was based on running away from thoughts and just discomfort in general. And the more I recognize that, I'm prioritizing the wrong thing, that was what was really beneficial. And recognizing that, this is something that is going to take me where I want to go if I can change my mindset around that. If I can start pursuing things that I really value, and that's what's going to kind of move me in the direction that I want to go. That's just such a huge component. And so I would say that, that's really been the biggest part of my whole mental health journey. And it's something that it's been going on for, gosh, over 10 years now. And it's still a daily practice. It's still something that, I'm not exactly perfect on, something that I'm going to work on for the rest of my life. And so it's part of the book, I guess, of my life that isn't going to end. And that's kind of something that I think I really like about it. It's something that I can continually work on pursuing and continually work on making it a more full part of my life. The more that I can act in ways that I value, in ways that are benefiting not only me, but family, community, and just the others around me, the better off I'm going to be. And the more I'm sinking time into reacting to fear, it's almost like a more selfish way of living. I'm just trying to defend myself from discomfort, and it's not something that's taking me or those others around me in the direction that is going to be beneficial for all of us. And so I think that, yeah, just really moving from that fear-based mindset over to a value-based mindset is probably one of the biggest things, and probably the most important chapter of my life.
Thank you so much for that answer, Nelson. I really appreciate it. I think something so valuable that you brought up is, it's an everyday process. It's an everyday battle. And, for most, the idea is to end it. But when you start moving throughout these positive techniques that you can implement within your life, you start to realize how beautiful and how grateful you should be for this life, because you get that change of perspective. You see why life is so beautiful. And like you said, it's an everyday process. It's an ongoing battle, but it gets easier as you start to become aware and start to offer some of these techniques within your life. I'm so thankful that you're able to take this time and share some of the insights that you have within mental health through your own experiences and through what you're doing within building brainwaves. We're going to make sure to have all of the links towards your work, Nelson, and we'll make sure to have my audience get in touch with you and to, build this positive community around mental health that we are aiming for within, our society today.
Awesome. Well, I'm definitely grateful for the opportunity. Thank you so much for having me on. And, I think, the more conversations we can have like these, the better off we'll all be. So just creating that open conversation. And I'm always going to be grateful for an opportunity to do that.
Wonderful. Thank you, Nelson, for being the 40th guest on the Mental Insights podcast. I truly appreciate it.